Hello, and welcome to this online presentation, Blessed Michael McGivney, the Waterbury Years. On behalf of the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center, thank you for joining this session, which is the second in a series of biographical presentations looking at the life and legacy of Father Michael McGivney, a parish priest and founder of the Knights of Columbus. At any point during the presentation, you may submit questions using the question utility on the right side of your screen, and I'll do my best to address questions along the way or at the end after our presentation is complete. I expect that the session will last about an hour. My guest today is Sister Veronica Mary Sullivan. She is the third in a family of 6 children from Waterbury, Connecticut, the same hometown as Blessed Michael McGivney. Sister Veronica is a registered nurse by training and formerly by profession. She entered the Sisters of Life in 1999 and has spent most of the 21 plus years since then in community promoting and protecting the dignity of human life in the greater New York City area. Sister, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Oh, what a joy. I know you have deep devotion to Father McGivney, having grown up in Waterbury, the same hometown. But I wonder, please, if you could tell us a little bit about your own coming to the Sisters of Life and a little bit about the community.
Okay, sure. Well, we were founded in 1991 by Cardinal O'Connor, the Archbishop of New York, and to promote and enhance the sacredness of human life. So that's our 4th vow. And we began with 5 sisters, and we are now 119 sisters. 80 plus are living in New York, and others in Denver, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Toronto. So the Holy Spirit has been very busy. And most of our charism is practical. We give retreats on the sacredness of human life, the dignity of the human person, mostly to women. And I'm involved in our Hope and Healing mission for healing after abortion. And then we have a home in Manhattan, which houses women. And then, of course, we serve women directly who are pregnant and seeking to choose life for their child. Yeah.
Outreach, and I'll share with the audience that we have a handout available. If you'll again look at your utilities, there is an opportunity for you to download a PDF file. It has a number of useful links, and among them is a link to the Sisters of Life website, so you can learn more about Sisters community, and particularly if someone may have an interest in their good work, supporting them, or perhaps even pursuing a vocation with them. Sister, it's such a joy to have you here. I want to talk now about the city of Waterbury, and of course this is where you grew up, and this is the city where Father McGivney was born and grew up as well. And the audience is now looking at a map of the entire state of Connecticut. So why don't you give us a little geography lesson?
Okay. Well, as you can see, it looks like New Britain is kind of like the center of the state. Hartford a little bit north of that, that's the capital, and Waterbury to the southwest of Hartford. So really about a third of the way in from the border of New York, and there's Waterbury. Waterbury is on a Route 8, that's the red line going up, okay, and the cross of 84 and Route 8, and follows from Torrington all the way down, pretty much along that red line is what's called the Naugatuck River. Naugatuck River is going to play a big part in our story as we go.
Excellent. And then, of course, for those that are unfamiliar, this is you can see in the little box here where Connecticut is located in the United States, and this compass that you would see down near the bottom is the approximately where New York City is. So
right.
This
to give an idea, I guess, Peter, it would be about a 40-minute drive from Waterbury to Hartford or New Haven.
Okay, and that, of course, is where Father McGivney was first stationed when he was ordained.
Right.
So, Sister, he was born in Waterbury,
right?
August 12th, 1852.
That's right,
So
1852.
he'd be 168 years old.
Yeah,
He was baptized a week later at St.
right,
Peter Church, which was the only Catholic church at that time in the
right.
city of Waterbury.
Uh-huh. Yeah. This
His
is it.
parents had immigrated, right? His parents had come from Ireland. Both were
His
born in
parents,
Ireland.
right? So his parents came from County Cavan in the center of Ireland, and they emigrated to Waterbury, which many of the Irish immigrants did because they knew they could get jobs in the exploding manufacturing in Waterbury at that time. And so they would enter in through New York and find their way up to Waterbury. There was Waterbury was considered, like many of the New England towns at the time, in Massachusetts, Connecticut, all throughout. Manufacturing was just booming. Um, his
So,
parents came in 1848 with the potato famine, and then they got married. They met here and married in 1849. Father McGivney was born here at this little map, which I'll explain to you, in 1852. So this is a map of the former map of Waterbury. This is the southern end of Waterbury. So he was born almost into a town called Naugatuck, which is about, if you look here, the yellow highlight on the left is the birthplace of Father McGivney, and the yellow on the right is the factory where Patrick McGivney worked, and it's called Merritt Nichols Iron Foundry. And it's right along the Naugatuck River, as you can see, the kind of winding and bending river there, as most of the factories were built up along the river. And the cottage, or the home where Father McGivney was born, was actually a property owned by Merritt Nichols Company. And so Patrick McGivney would have to cross a wire bridge which went over the river. And if you read the book, Parish Priest, the straight line there by the yellow line where Father McGivney was born is the railroad tracks. So in the book, it talks about it being very rural. And as you can see, there's just a couple of little dots here and there, which means a dot would denote a homestead. There's only a couple of little dots there. And indeed, it was a very rural section of Waterbury at the time.
so Sister, Patrick McGivney, Michael's father,
Mhm.
was a molder. Now, when he came from Ireland, he didn't have any background. He didn't have a profession, at least not in
Mhm.
manufacturing. But he came
Mhm.
looking for opportunity. He came really, like Mary Lynch, his wife, escaping famine.
That's right.
And you said that he worked for the Merritt Nichols Company. This
Mhm.
overhead slide is a site of that original foundry, not the precise building that he worked in, or at least
Mhm.
not entirely, but this would
Right.
have been a location where it was set.
This was the location, right, of that former slide, that yellow line which showed the foundry. So this has expanded obviously over the years, and other companies have taken over this site. And actually, if you were to go there today, it was the whole old factory was leveled maybe a year or two ago, so it's an empty lot now. But it's typical of a manufacturing site. And then this is from a catalog, an architectural catalog actually from 1896, which shows, it just is a little clipping in the catalog that the Merritt Nichols properties located south of South Leonard Street, which kind of narrows actually the location that we've identified as the actual birthplace of Father McGivney, and that the property was going to be subdivided. So you could see in the 1890s, that whole area was ready to explode residentially. Yeah.
Now, Sister, you pointed out a moment ago on the map that there were railroad tracks.
Right. Ah,
And recently,
yep,
a group of your sisters from your community
right.
were led on pilgrimage by you to
That's
some
right.
very historic sites in Waterbury. And the sisters are standing now on those railroad tracks, very near where the cottage in which Father
Hmm.
McGivney was born existed. It's no longer there, but
Right.
this was a pause for prayer, praying the McGivney canonization prayer near the site that Father McGivney was actually born.
Right. And these are the actual railroad tracks. So there, one thing that does remain is the river's there behind us, and then railroad tracks. And we got there, and I had never actually been there before because we just kind of identified this site recently. And we did not anticipate that there would be a fence there. So we looked over the fence and prayed the prayer. We figured we got it down to like a 50-foot square.
We were very close. So
We
there
were
you
very,
are on the left, and the house would have been
yeah,
somewhere behind you. The sisters that are on the
that's right.
right have their
Right.
backs to the river,
That's
and
right.
so this would have been the path that Patrick would have walked on his
That's
way to
exactly
work,
right.
to and from. He
That,
would have had to cross these
mhm,
tracks,
right?
and then, as you noted, there was a pedestrian bridge that
Yes.
went across the river, and
Right.
so it wasn't a very long walk, but it was essential that he walked because that was the only
Yeah,
form of transportation in those
that's
days.
right. Yeah. And that was 1852. And he worked there, I think, for the first 7 years of his time in Waterbury. At that point, which we'll get to a little bit later on, the family began to grow, and the house became, little cottage became too small, so they had to move. And then his father, Patrick, had to get employment at another factory, which calls the Farrell Foundry. So some of the viewers may be familiar with all these companies in Waterbury.
Well, sister, we talked a moment ago about St. Peter Church,
Uh-huh.
and the significance of St. Peter Church is that it wasn't originally
Mhm.
St. Peter Church. It was a church that the first priest assigned to the Naugatuck Valley purchased.
Right.
So explain this most unusual picture, if you would, please.
Yeah. This is a great picture. Actually, the archivist from the Mattituck Museum, Stephanie Crawford, sent this to me. And it's a daguerreotype, which is a type of photography before actual photography that we know it today became popular. But so this was a silver plate. And what we're looking at is the uh, first, the building in the front is the old St. John's Episcopal Church on the green in Waterbury. And behind it is St. John's Episcopal Church as it stands today. So because the Episcopal Church was growing, they had to get a new church. So they were going to just knock down this old church. And thank God the pastor of that church, the first Catholic pastor in Waterbury, said, I'd like to purchase it. And they said, fine, if you can move it up the road, great. And so he did. He found a way to move it, and he moved it up East Main Street. At the time, Catholics were not looked too kindly upon, and so they didn't sell them property close to the center of town, but further out. But then when they moved the building, they couldn't get it up East Main Street over a certain rise. So they actually had to sell them property. And there St. Peter's Church stayed at 118 East Main Street. And so this is it there.
This is an artist's rendering of what it looked like at the time when it was used as a Catholic church. But then
Right.
this is an actual photograph that was taken sometime later.
Yeah.
And why don't you explain that this building doubled for another purpose?
Right. So you can see the steeple's been removed, and the church was actually St. Peter's Church in 1848 or 49 began. And then it became, when the new Immaculate Conception Church was built across the street because the rapidly growing Irish, primarily Irish population, Catholic population in Waterbury was growing. They needed a big church, bigger church, and so in 1857, the new Immaculate Conception was opened, and this became East Main Street School, and thanks to Father Hendricken, who did that. This is actually a later picture of that same, not the same building, but the same site. So East Main Street School was knocked down, and then the Catholic pastor at the time, after Father Hendricken, built what's now is St. Patrick's Hall. If you're a Waterburyan, you know it as the rectory building, but it never actually served as a rectory. It was St. Patrick's Hall, where lots of meetings happened. And actually the Knights of Columbus Council from Waterbury, Sheridan Council, and the Barcelona Council both actually met there at St. Patrick's Hall for many years. So this is an overview. I think it's a fire map, actually, of kind of in the center of the image there. There's a block where, if you can kind of see it, it's where the new Immaculate Conception Church was located on East Main Street, okay? And across the street, directly almost, would be St. Patrick's Hall, or the former East Main Street School, where Michael McGivney was baptized, went to grade school, and graduated, and where his parents were married. The new Immaculate Conception Church, and I think there's a picture coming up about that, is where Father McGivney received his other sacraments, his first communion and confirmation, and it's also where he said his first Mass. Okay.
And I want to point out, Sister, how significant it is that as he was going to school each day, he would come out the front door, and the church was right across the street from where he was attending school.
Yes,
so
that's right.
The church was very integral in his upbringing.
The church was integral in his upbringing. It was the center, really, of family life back then. With all the immigrants coming, their life revolved really around family, their workplace, and their church and parish. And their parish priest and their church played a huge part in just the entire backdrop and life of so many of the immigrants, because they were with like-minded people.
So we mentioned that Father McGivney was born in 1852.
Yes.
He was baptized, as you said, at St. Peter's Church. His parents, coincidentally, were married at St. Peter's Church.
That's right.
But then this church, which we're looking at, an artist's rendering of the Immaculate Conception Church, was built across the street, as you noted, from St. Peter's. And this went up, I believe, from 1857 to 1859. So Michael would have been, 6 or 7 years old, and that's just about the time that he would have begun school, because I believe at that time students typically began their education at about age 6. So he would have been going to school looking at this building under construction. That's
right. Yes, and apparently his mother was quite the homeschooler. So Michael was a tremendous student, very smart, and graduated early, actually, from East Main Street School. But this is a great church, and just to let you know how much this was just a center of Catholic life in Waterbury. Really, the next Catholic church structures were not built into the 1870s, and that was St. Patrick's Church, I believe, and then St. Anne's and St. Joseph's, and other ones were built in the 1880s. So this being built in the 1850s really was the center of Catholic life for many years before other churches started to be built. And just an interesting little note on that is it was named the Immaculate Conception 1858. It was in 1854, I think, that the dogma was promulgated of the Immaculate Conception. And so really, it's one of the, I think it was the first church in America named under her patronage. So it's beautiful to think that way. Yeah. Again,
So you said that Michael's parents were, in particular his mom, Mary Lynch McGivney, was very good at helping him to learn and advance in his studies.
Yes.
This is important to note because Michael advanced very rapidly through his education. In fact, he was advanced many times during the duration of his stay at St. Peter's School, and he graduated at the tender age of 13. This is a photo of his graduating class.
Right.
And Michael is there on the left in the very front.
Yeah, sitting on the far left there. And, you know, I think this is probably just who he was. I mean, he excelled in the seminary, he excelled as a priest. You know, this was just, you know, his formative years in Waterbury were surrounded by people who really took an interest in him. His mother understood the value of education, and his parish priest, Father Hendricken, also spotted Michael early on. And I'm sure just being encouraged, you know, how we can strive for something when we're just given a little bit of an encouragement. This is Father Hendricken. Now, he's a bishop here. He became the Bishop of Providence, Rhode Island. But many years before, if you have the book Parish Priest, there's a picture of him as a younger man in there. He was very central to Father McGivney's life and very formative for him. He was the pastor of the Immaculate Conception Church when Father McGivney began school, but even prior to that as his pastor, and really encouraged Michael all along the way. And when Michael did decide that God might be calling him to be a priest, Father Hendricken went with Michael to talk to his father. And of course, his father wasn't too keen on it in the beginning. And so when he was at age 16, Father Hendricken here went with him to seminary up on the train to Canada.
You make an important point. When Michael had graduated, we mentioned he was only 13 years of age, but he already had a notion, he already had a calling to pursue studies for the priesthood. But his father was reluctant to give him his permission to go. He was still at a very tender age, I think you'll admit. And so he asked him to go to work. But Father Hendricken, as you noted, was instrumental in helping him to develop his vocation. I want to just pause for a moment and talk a little bit about the church at the time in the United States. And I'll do so by sharing a little bit of information about Father Hendricken. He was a native of Ireland, and the Bishop of Hartford at the time, Bishop O'Reilly, was also an Irish native. In fact, most of the priests serving the church, at least in the New England area, were of Irish heritage. Bishop O'Reilly actually had traveled to Ireland to ask priests to come to the United States. Now, for those of you who are familiar with history, you'll know that during the potato famine, there was a tremendous exodus from the island of Ireland. 1.6 million, about a third of the population left, if I remember correctly. And so there were, you know, a number of priests that were, I hate to call them surplus because that's not fair, but you know, there was quite a number of priests that were available to come and minister in the United States, and so they were invited to come. Father Hendricken actually was still a seminarian when Bishop O'Reilly met him and invited him to come to Connecticut. He was actually considering entering the missions and going east.
Mhm.
But Bishop O'Reilly encouraged him to join the missions, if you will, and go west
Mhm.
across the Atlantic. And so he did. He was ordained by Bishop Riley, and he
Mhm.
came to first Connecticut. I don't know where his first assignment was, but I believe he came to the United States in 1853, so a year after
Mhm.
Michael's birth, and was assigned in Waterbury 1855.
Yeah.
He was there for something on the order of 15 or 18 years.
Yeah, Father Hendricken was quite a man. I mean, he was really forward thinking. And back then, I know we know it today that priests are asked, so much is asked of a priest, that has to do a lot with administration and temporal affairs and everything. But back then it was the same way. All these immigrants were very poor, but the influx of the immigrant population required him to be thinking all the time about how am I going to raise the money to expand. And so he was really brilliant. And I'd love to read a biography of him, actually, because what a guy. There was a public school in Waterbury named after him, which was interesting. Hendricken School.
Indeed, and of course, there's a very famous high school now in Rhode Island named after him as the first bishop of the Diocese of Providence.
That's right. Yeah.
So Waterbury had a reputation when Michael was born as the brass city, and we're going to talk a
Right.
little bit about that because we will learn that Michael was very involved in that. But it also was widely regarded as the most famous or most populous Catholic city
Mhm.
in the United States.
Mhm. Again, well, primarily in the middle of the 19th century, okay, till probably 1890 or so, the influx of immigrants was primarily Irish and German. And so it went from, I think, 1840 with maybe 30 Catholics, 1845, 30 Catholics to 1900, the turn of the century, 1910, of maybe 50,000 Catholics. So it swelled. After 1890, the Italians, the Poles, Lithuanians, and everybody wanted their own parish, And so you can see here this little clipping from, I took it out of the town and city of Waterbury from certain years. It shows the absolute huge number of parishioners that attended the different parishes. I think the one that struck me the most was Our Lady of Lourdes, which was the Italian parish down on South Main Street, off the center of town. 17,000 parishioners in 1917. So can you imagine being that pastor? But it was an extremely Catholic town, again, because they could get jobs in the manufacturing mills, and it was jobs that did not require a education, so to speak. So it was unskilled labor, and they just wanted to support their families and could do that by getting jobs in many manufacturing mills there. Yeah.
I can't imagine 17,000 Catholics attending
Yeah,
one parish church. They must have had Sunday masses on the hour
I know.
every Sunday throughout
Yeah.
the entire day.
So Our Lady of Lourdes was actually, I can remember as a young girl, if you wanted to go to the earliest mass in Waterbury on Sunday morning, because there was no vigil then, you had to go to Our Lady of Lourdes. You had to go to the 6 a.m. at Our Lady of Lourdes. Later on, the Immaculate had a 5:25, so, everybody wanted to get to mass on Sunday in Waterbury. So the earliest mass for many years really was the 5:25. I think it's still 6 a.m. now. Yeah.
You
Okay, so
mentioned
this,
earlier that Father McGivney, when the family began to grow, because we haven't
right?
mentioned that Michael was the eldest of a large family. He had
Yes.
a family of 13. Now, they didn't all survive, but Mary and Patrick had 13 children.
Mhm.
And they were forced to leave the cottage that Michael was born in and they
Right,
moved to this home.
right. So this home is it's no longer there, on Railroad Hill in Waterbury. And the property that it's sitting on used to be owned by the American Brass Company. And it was purchased by Father McGivney's father, actually, from the factory. And it's on the corner of Washington Avenue and Railroad Hill. And it would be in, say, about 100 feet on the left. There were other McGivney family members, cousins, and others who lived on that same property. And as they grew up, as they raised their families, there was actually 4 homes around that, including that house on that property. And so yeah, that was the McGivney homestead. And there we are standing on that spot right now. In the background there would be, between the sisters and the buildings you can see in the background, is the river. If you kind of went about 50 feet or so, you'd be in the river. And so we're saying a little prayer there right on the actual location of his of the home where he visited, where the rest of his family was born, where his mother lived and father lived till they died. That was home for, yeah.
So this would be on the west side of the river, the same side of the river in which the cottage was earlier, but that's the same river, the Naugatuck.
Exactly.
You can see, the audience might be able to see to the left of the sister, and in that center portion through the brush, the water of the river, and then of course the city proper across the way,
Right.
Waterbury.
Mm-hmm. And that area over there across the river was Irish for many, many years, no longer. It was called Washington Hill. And all the Irish would say, oh, I grew up on the hill. I grew up on the hill. And so, yeah.
So Michael, after he graduated, we discussed, had wanted to pursue seminary studies. And Patrick was reluctant.
Right.
Instead, he instructed him to go to work.
Right. So, like other boys, Michael was 13, and there were no labor laws, child labor laws in those days. So, along with many others, he went to work in what was called then the spoon factory, and this is the location of the Hayden, Booth, and Holmes manufacturing mills. The spoon factory, it's a little building up on the upper left-hand corner, those pink blocks. If you could see it, it says spoon shop. And that was the place designated for the manufacturing of not just spoons, but tableware. And I have a little show and tell. And so dear woman at the Basilica, friend Aurora, many of you in Waterbury who are listening might know her, and Aurora, if you are, this was a fork that she found online from 1867, made by that very company. So who knows? It's spoons, forks, knives, etc. And it's silver.
So that would have been the time that Michael was there.
Yeah.
You know, what else is important to point out, sister? We haven't mentioned it. Michael graduated at age 13. He was born in 1852, so he graduated in 1865, coincidentally, the same year that the Civil War ended. So he's growing up and he's going to school while a war is being waged.
Yeah, the entire American history map that was going on around the time Father McGivney was growing up is just astounding, because with the Civil War, of course, you had the expansion of the railroads, you had industry was needed to expand, inventors, the magnates, Carnegie and Vanderbilt and Jay Gould and all those, that was their time. A lot of growth.
Sister, do I remember correctly? Does this map depict the approximate location of the McGivney home?
Mhm. So again, you can kind of see that line going straight up the middle there between the pink buildings is the railroad tracks. And it's crossing over, once again, the Naugatuck River, which if you took it off to the right there, it would just kind of bend right around, as you can see, kind of coming back around at the bottom. And that river, just a short distance below that, was the location of Father McGivney's family home on Washington Hill. So if he were to walk to work, it would be about a 5-minute walk.
So Mary McGivney must have been at least accepting of the fact that while Michael was going to work at such a tender age, at least he wasn't working too distant from home.
Wasn't working too distant from home, and the spoon shop was a place where other boys would be working. It wasn't heavy machinery that the boys would be doing. So the huge manufacturing mill is off there to the right. So she felt probably a little more okay with it. And then that's now the expanded Hayden's, Holmes, Booth, Hayden's factory. And as you can see, that's just one of the many factories in Waterbury at the time.
So we talked about it being Civil War era. It was a time of great industrial growth. And Waterbury, as you noted, was already on a railroad line. It was on a river. Those were two chief methods of transportation. And so it was very suited for this rapid growth itself, especially in the manufacturing realm. And brass was one of the major products that was produced, or brass items, throughout Waterbury. There were many plants of this sort. We mentioned that his dad was a molder. So he would have worked in that type of manufacturing, and Michael, for 3 years, was working here at Holmes, Booth, and Hayden's manufacturing spoons.
Right.
And
you can see the in those buildings in those days, see all the windows that they needed to have, because this was prior to electricity, so they needed all the daylight they could get.
Absolutely. Sister, he obediently worked for 3 years here at Holmes, Booth, and Hayden's, but the ambition, the desire to pursue priestly studies didn't subside.
It did not subside. He continued to desire it, and at 16, he approached his father again, who then gave permission. So someone was praying for him.
Now, you mentioned earlier Father Hendricken, and how Father Hendricken was instrumental in developing Michael's vocation. He actually accompanied Michael, and I believe as many as 10 or 11 other boys from Waterbury.
Right.
When the bishop at the time assigned them to seminary studies, of all places, in Canada.
Right.
Why is it that he chose to send them to Canada?
Well, Waterbury also had an influx of French Canadians at the time. French, and they began to settle in another area, and became the St. Anne's parish, French Canadians. But because of the language, they wanted their priests now to learn, other than English, French, so that they could minister to these incoming immigrants from Canada. And so they sent them there initially for a number of years.
So the pastoral sense of the bishop, he had initially attracted priests from Ireland to come and help the growing population of Catholics, predominantly Irish Catholics, as they assimilated, if you will, into American society. But now, post-Civil War, and this is the story of my own grandparents, they migrated from French Canada to Connecticut to work in textile mills. And it's part of that growth in the French Canadian population that you were talking about earlier. And the bishop saw this.
Right.
He was the bishop at the time the Hartford diocese included the entirety of Connecticut as
Right.
well as
Yes.
Rhode Island.
Right.
Ultimately, Father Hendricken would be named the first Bishop of Providence, and that entire diocese is the state of Rhode Island. And I think at once it was a little bit of Massachusetts as well, but today
Right.
it's the entirety of Rhode Island. But here's a pastoral sense: the bishop sending young men,
Right.
English-speaking men,
Yes.
American-born, to Canada so
Right.
that they could become familiar with the culture and the customs
Right.
of Catholics there and help to minister to them. Now, it's also important to note that it wasn't as though the bishop had an option in his own diocese. There was no seminary in the Hartford diocese.
No,
So
there
they
was
had to
not.
travel somewhere for their
Right.
instruction.
And so I think because of the reason of the French Canadians coming into Waterbury, chose Canada versus, say, Baltimore. But I do think it's interesting to note that Father McGivney's age and where he providentially was born was probably the formation of the first American-born parish priests in that time. Otherwise, like you said, many of the priests were coming from Ireland.
Absolutely. So, sister, on the pilgrimage, there was a stop at St. Joseph's Cemetery. We've kind of covered the span of Father McGivney's life, the 16 years
Yeah.
from 1852 to 68, in which he was living in Waterbury. And the family plot is quite prominent, actually, at St. Joseph's.
Yes.
Both Mary Lynch McGivney and Patrick McGivney are buried here. His two brothers, Patrick McGivney and John McGivney, both who became priests in the Diocese of Hartford, are buried here. Michael was buried here originally.
Right. Michael was buried here until he was exhumed and actually moved from this area in March of 1982 and to New Haven, where he's entombed now. And also two sisters are buried here as well. His two brothers, Patrick and John, as you mentioned, Peter, just they were the first supreme chaplains after, actually not the first, because Father McGivney died in 1890, and then John and Patrick were supreme chaplains from 1901 to 1939, back to back. They're buried here. So this was revered and visited frequently by Waterburyans, you know. This was their saint. And Father McGivney, they just took great pride in the fact that the founder of the Knights of Columbus was one of their own. And so I think it was a great sorrow to some to see them come and take him off to New Haven. I think they forgive.
So,
But
right, Knights of Columbus will recognize that Father McGivney now is entombed in the nave of St.
yes,
Mary's in New Haven, where he founded the Knights of Columbus. But for on the order of 90 years from the time of his death in 1890 until late in 1981, he was buried here.
yes.
Now, sister, this is also a popular place for your family. I understand that your family would visit this site, this tomb, very often.
Well, I'll talk a little bit later maybe about a miracle of my own family, but as our devotion to Father McGivney grew, we would visit here all the time to that site. And then also just my mom would plant flowers there, and she tended the grave and visited very frequently. You know, this is a statue of Father McGivney in downtown Waterbury. That's the train station in the background. Actually, now it's the newspaper, where the newspaper is, but it was the train station for many, many years. And this statue was given to Waterbury by Supreme Council on the 75th anniversary of its founding. And that's right there on the street outside City Hall, and it's called Grand Street in Waterbury, outside of Superior Court. And Father McGivney's blessing the city of Waterbury, and yeah, it's a great thing to note when people drive by that the street was renamed Father McGivney Boulevard, actually back in the early 2000, I think 2004.
So he is the people of Waterbury take great pride in the native son that they have in Father Michael McGivney.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the devotion that you had to Father McGivney. I mentioned at the outset that you were the third oldest in a family of 6 children. Here's a family photo that you've been kind enough to share, Mom and Dad, in the center, and 4 boys and 2 girls.
4 boys and 2 girls. My brother John in the upper right-hand corner there. He sent me this picture, and so Dennis is in the lower left. We'll talk about Dennis in a little while. Bill is above him. Both of them were with the Lord, please God, and myself and my sister, Maura, John, and Jim. And Jim, who's sitting next to my mom, is now Father Jim Sullivan, and pastor of the Immaculate Conception in Waterbury. Mom and Dad in the center, of course. Yeah.
So the devotion that you mentioned to Father McGivney existed even before the time that his cause was introduced, which was in the late 1990s. But naturally, the Sullivan family met with the introduction of that cause very enthusiastically.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you mentioned that 2 of your brothers are now with the Lord. I'd like, if you would, please, to share the story of your brother Dennis.
Sure.
And the wonderful intercession that Father McGivney had on his behalf.
Great. Okay, there's my brother Dennis. Dennis was a farrier or horseshoer, for those who don't know. And Dennis had diabetes, and he also had a difficulty with his heart. He had difficulty regulating it. And so in 2006, he had a major heart attack and drove himself to the hospital, walked in and collapsed. And they worked on him for 45 minutes with no response. All kinds of terrible lab work, blood work coming back. And some of the doctors actually gave up. But one doctor said, he's so young, let's give him 5 more minutes. And they did. And thank you, Jesus, he made it in that he came back in that time. And they got him on all kinds of very heavy duty medications and kept him alive, although they anticipated the worst, probably have brain damage at that point, not sure that he was going to make it even through the night because he was just really hanging by a thread. So when I got there the next morning and I saw him, I actually was a cardiac intensive care nurse for part of the time I was a nurse. And I took one look at him and the medications he was on, and I said, this just does not look good. He was 3 times his size. He had swollen so much. So when I saw the doctors talking to my mom about the situation, which was dire, I just remember going over to the window and looking up into the sky and saying, Lord, you can't do this. This can't happen. And because my dad had died the year before, and my other brother died 3 years before, and my poor mom, and all of us really. And so the thought came to me out of nowhere, Father McGivney. I had no devotion to him at the time. And I thought, oh my goodness, we have to go. So we went down to the tomb of Father McGivney. Mom said, go. My brother Jim and John and I prayed there for a miracle. We stayed for the noon mass. And afterward, my brothers were speaking with the pastor, Father Holt at the time. And I was in the pew just praying my heart out like I've never prayed. And I remember hearing, which is a beautiful, total grace from God. I remember hearing, as I was praying, I guess you could say it's a voice, say, tell me what I need to do. I knew it was Father McGivney. So I said, I knew exactly what needed to be done because I'm a nurse and he's very practical, I'm very practical. I said, Father, this is what you need to do. He needs to come off of this medication. This has to come down. He can't have any brain damage. These vessels need to open. His kidneys need to start working right now. And so I got down the list, and then I felt he left. And I was just filled with a great peace. And I remember sitting up in the pew thinking, I think he's going to be okay. And so then I went and talked to my brothers, and they said they felt the same way. And then by the time we got back to the hospital, they had taken Dennis in for one last attempt at a procedure. We got a call on the phone that said that we got our miracle. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So he survived this. This was 45 minutes on the table
with no brain damage. Yeah, and the doctor was actually Muslim, and he came in and he said, I have no explanations. I think it's a miracle. I'm Muslim. I don't. And so, yeah, there he is. God bless him.
So you said that this heart attack occurred when, sister?
So it was 2006, and he lived for another 12 years. And I got to see his grandson be born, and just shared so many more years and wonderful times with us and his daughter, and God, God, he loved life. Yeah.
A beautiful grace.
Yeah, so it was a
grace.
tremendous gift from Father McGivney. And,
Father McGivney.
it just goes to show you, Peter, that long before the Mikey miracle, Father McGivney was busy. And, not just me, but other Waterburyans that I've talked to have reached out to Father McGivney for favors and have been very blessed by his help. He's a powerful intercessor.
He is indeed. And sister, we had Brian Caulfield on. You know Brian well. He's the vice postulator for Father McGivney's cause. Yes. And he shared with us a number of these stories. There were miracles that were quite significant and actually had been submitted for consideration to the Vatican. And then there were countless favors, like you just recounted with Dennis's miraculous healing.
Yeah.
That we know Father McGivney had a hand in. His intercession was powerful.
Absolutely. Yes. Grateful to God. And all I can do is say, pray to him. Expect that he'll do the best he can. It's who he is. He's like, he sees a need and he wants to do something about it. I think he's been like that probably always. And that's who he is in heaven for us.
He is indeed. And he's been, I think, in particular now, as we have just surpassed the occasion of his beatification, grace is very strong. So for those of you that need a miracle or need a favor, need the strong intercession of a soul in heaven, look to Father Michael McGivney for that grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he likes to help people get jobs. From what I've heard, help people pay their mortgage. So
indeed, to reconcile families,
addiction.
To encourage, to overcome addictions, to help people come back to the faith if they've been separated.
Yes, exactly.
So these in particular, and if you think about them, they're very very consistent with the pastoral work
Mhm.
that he was doing
Mhm.
throughout his adult life, and he died at a very young age.
Mhm.
In fact, Sister,
38.
you mentioned that your brother, Father James, is the pastor now at Immaculate Conception. It's not the same church that we saw. There
Mhm.
is a new, larger Immaculate Conception. In fact, it's a basilica. It has the distinction of the
Right.
basilica. And you noted that it was the first church in the U.S. named after the Immaculate Conception.
Yes.
Father James, or Father Jim Sullivan, is going to join us 2 weeks from now. And he's going to talk about Father McGivney's life after he left New Haven.
Mhm.
He moved north of where we've been discussing tonight. So New Haven was down along Long Island Sound, right on the shore.
Mhm.
And then Waterbury is on the order of 20 or 25 miles north and a little bit west of New Haven. And then you cited the river and the highway, Route 8, that goes directly from Bridgeport all the way up to Winsted, Connecticut. A few further miles, 5, 6, 8 miles up the road is Thomaston from Waterbury.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that is the city that Father was made a pastor at St. Thomas Church. So 2 weeks from tonight, we will hear about his final years. And if you download that sheet that I mentioned earlier, there's a number of links on there. You can learn more about the resources, about Father McGivney's upbringing, about his youth, parish priest. There's some excellent videos there. And there's also a link for you to register so that you can partake in that particular event 2 weeks from tonight. Sister, we're nearly out of time, but I wonder if you would be kind enough we've made it a practice to pray to Father McGivney, this
Yes.
prayer for his canonization. So as we wrap up our session tonight, may I invite you to lead us in the prayer for the canonization of
I will.
Blessed Michael McGivney.
More than happy to do it. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Say, in the beginning, I said the Sisters of Life works are practical. Well, above all, they're spiritual. And we pray 4 hours a day. And so I'm happy to do this prayer. Okay. God our Father, protector of the poor and defender of the widow and orphan, you called your priest, Blessed Michael McGivney, to be an apostle of Christian family life and lead the young to the generous service of their neighbor. Through the example of his life and virtue, may we follow your Son, Jesus Christ, more closely, fulfilling his commandment of charity and building up his body, which is the church, that the inspiration of your servant prompt us to greater confidence in your love, so that we may continue his work of caring for the needy and the outcast. We humbly ask that you glorify Blessed Michael McGivney on earth, according to the design of your holy will. Through his intercession, grant the favor I now present. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Sister
Amen.
Veronica Mary Sullivan, thank you so much. Thank
Oh,
you
you're
for
welcome.
sharing
Thank you.
with our audience the history of Father McGivney in Waterbury, your own experience, the beautiful favor that your family enjoyed through his intercession.
Beautiful.
He is a powerful intercessor, and we can continue to ask his prayers for our needs.
Amen.
Also on that sheet is an opportunity for anyone who is not a member of the McGivney Guild. Please use the link on that sheet to join the McGivney Guild and become part of the community of prayer, regularly asking that Father McGivney will be raised to the honors of the altar. Sister, you please tune in 2 weeks from tonight so that you can see Father Jim talking about Father McGivney at the other end of his life, the final years of his life.
Okay, will do.
God bless, sister. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you to all our audience for your participation tonight. Until 2 weeks from tonight, may you have good health.
All right.